need to understand is that the blood cholesterol test that the doctor gave for you is utterly, completely useless. It predicts absolutely nothing. So I think the evidence is really clear that if you want to keep your brain in function, you better eat a lot of fat, and as you get older, the more fat the better. And I also have a bias to think it needs to be saturated fat, that our cells are struggling to get enough saturated fat from pasture-fed animals, really high-quality fat.
Tim Noakes is a Rhodesian-born doctor of science and medicine who's done work in the field of exercise physiology. His athletic background as a runner includes over 70 marathons completed. The focus of this episode will mainly be on the criticism Tim has received from his colleagues and an overview of the charges of unprofessional conduct Tim currently faces at a trial being held by the Health Profession Council of South Africa. If you don't think cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease, or you believe him when he says your cells are struggling to get enough saturated fat, there's probably nothing I can say to change your mind. Good luck with that. Before we transition into the primary focus of this episode, there is one thing I want to address. Diabetes.
Each of us vary in our insulin resistance. And if you are profoundly insulin resistant like I am, and might maybe have a diagnosis of diabetes, so I've got extreme insulin resistance.
Tim Noakes was eating a high carbohydrate diet and carbohydrate loading during his career as an endurance athlete. Tim Noakes is a diabetic and describes himself as being extremely insulin resistant. For the people that want to claim this is a result of Tim eating a high-carb diet many years ago, let's make one thing clear. Tim Noakes was never eating a whole foods plant-based diet. Tim was not a vegan. If, in fact, Tim's high-carb diet was responsible for his development of diabetes, then he failed on that diet as an omnivore. If the diet he recommends cures diabetes, why does he still have diabetes? Dr. Neil Bernard has a near 100% success rate curing type 2 diabetes with a whole foods plant-based diet.
And I really get frustrated when people say there's no science or you're a pseudoscientist, and it's been very taxing to live with that.
You talking about that one time an open letter arguing against your diet recommendations was published in the South African newspapers? Signed by your colleagues at the university you work for, including the head of the Department of Medicine, the head of the Division of Human Nutrition, and the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences? In that open letter, those men said you were making outrageous, unproven claims about disease prevention, and that you maligned the integrity and credibility of peers who criticized your diet for being evidence deficient. Now let's get into the details of the trial.
And the story is that in February 2014, I received a question on Twitter from a mother who asked, should babies and mothers continue to eat the low carbohydrate, high fat diet? And I finished off the tweet by suggesting that the mother should, to really look after her child, she should wean her infant onto the low carbohydrate, high fat diet.
The former president of the Association for Dietetics in South Africa, Claire Julsing Strydom, reported Tim Noakes to the Health Profession Council of South Africa. The HPCSA has charged him with unprofessional conduct for giving unconventional advice to a breastfeeding mother on a social network. I'm going to show you some of the highlights from Tim Noakes' testimony at the hearing. The first day, most of his effort was spent distancing himself from the Twitter comment and beginning to attempt to establish an evolutionary rationale for his dietary advice.
So I said that Mrs. Leemstra should wean if it was her child. The advice was for everyone to wean onto a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Ketogenic did not appear in what I said for a very simple reason, that the diet we prescribe, although it produces ketones, is not the ketogenic diet that you use to treat patients. The very low carbohydrate diet I describe as below 25 grams. And even at 25 grams, if you're eating protein, you will not have significant ketosis. By that I mean you won't have ketone blood values above 1. So because if you're eating protein, you can eat a very, very low carbohydrate diet, but as long as you're eating protein, you're going to stimulate insulin and you'll inhibit the ketosis.
Yes. And did you suggest to her that she should have a low, very low carbohydrate, high fat, high protein diet?
I did not. And we've been eating this food for millions of years, and if we hadn't weaned our children onto these foods, humans wouldn't exist. So on first principle, I knew the complaint had no basis.
Mr. McClure, I have a crazy friend who says it's wrong to eat meat. Is he crazy?
No, just ignorant. You see, your crazy friend never heard of the food chain. Just ask this scientician.
So this is absolute evidence that humans are carnivorous. We're designed for carnivory. We're not designed for fermenting plants in a large colon and cecum.
He'll tell you that in nature, one creature invariably eats another to survive.
Tim Noakes is claiming the human body and digestive system is optimized for a carnivorous diet. This is a good example of why critics have called his dietary approach evidence deficient. We have research that shows the benefits of prebiotics found in plants on the microbiota of different areas of the colon. To say that human beings were not designed to digest plants by fermenting in the colon is a striking misrepresentation of reality. In day 2, he shifts his focus towards fueling the brains of babies with ketones, and finally he provides an overview of his nutritional philosophy for the young. The following excerpts are from the actual slides and testimony provided by Tim Noakes.
So the brain of the infant uses ketones to a greater extent than adults. So it has to be important. Ketones have to be increasingly important for children or infants. And all I've said is that you need to be on a low carbohydrate diet of the kind that will provide sufficient ketones for brain health. So my point is, I'm trying to suggest that there is a good diet that's going to make our brains healthy, and that is a meat, fish-based diet with eggs and dairy, and that if we're going to exclude that from our diet or not make it the priority, the primary priority, there are consequences for the nation because our children will not develop the brains that they require.
At one point in late 2016, the HPCSA put out a statement declaring Tim Noakes to be guilty of unprofessional conduct, but apparently this was released prematurely and was retracted. This trial is not getting a lot of press here in America, but I think the outcome has significant implications. Basically, Tim Noakes advised breastfeeding mothers to wean their children onto a fad weight loss diet and defended his advice with paleo logic like, because evolution. If the HPCSA accepts the defense of his dietary recommendations on scientific grounds, there could be additional implications for public health policy at a national level outside the US. Apparently, low-carb diets have seen a resurgence in places like South Africa after being promoted as a, quote, food revolution by popular authors like Tim Noakes. It seems unlikely, but these misguided low-carb recommendations could be incorporated into the dietary guidelines of developing countries. Regardless of the outcome, I would argue that social media has and will continue to influence the doctor-patient relationship towards the direction of more impersonal contact. The final results of the HPCSA trial are expected to be released in April 2017.
Huh?